Do you feel like you're a survivor?
Yeah, I shouldn't be alive.
Three 12-year-old girls walked into a park in Wisconsin, but only 2 of them were planning to walk back out. The plan wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about anger. It was because they believed a fictional internet character was real and would kill their families if they didn't prove their loyalty.
I didn't want to do this. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't.
What started as a completely ordinary sleepover with roller skating, dress up, and donuts the next morning turned into one of the girls being stabbed 19 times and left in the woods to die. The other 2 girls headed off to the freeway on foot, trying to reach a forest they believed was home to Slenderman. And the hardest part about this case isn't just what they did, it's how to them it all made perfect sense. It's May 31st, 2014 in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and to understand what ends up happening in those woods, we need to understand who these 3 girls were and what one of them was experiencing that nobody had caught on to, and where a fictional character created on the internet forum fits into all of it. So hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going into the Slenderman stabbing. What happened, who was involved, and what has happened since. And before we get into it, I just want to thank everyone who's been watching. I'd really appreciate it if you'd like, comment, and subscribe. Every view, every like, and every comment really helps the channel grow. So let's get into the background of who these 3 girls were and how they fit together as friends. It seems that there's a recurring theme of 3-person friendships sometimes going awry, and you see that there's multiple true crime stories where, and especially it seems like with women, which is another kind of fascinating psychological thing of what is it about 3 people being friends that makes that kind of a more dangerous type of friendship, not one that always ends in stabbing, but one that can end in a lot of social heartbreak, especially for girls. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So who are these 3 girls? There's Payton Leutner, who's the victim, Morgan Geyser, who is the mastermind of the crime, and Anissa Weier, who were all 3 friends. Payton had been Morgan's closest friend since the 4th grade, but she knew the dynamic had shifted in her friendship with Morgan when Anissa entered the picture. But she cared for Morgan, and so she stayed friends with her, which isn't something that every 12-year-old girl would do. So it makes you feel like Payton was really a true friend to Morgan. Morgan Geyser was the birthday girl. She was the one who just turned 12 the day before the sleepover. People describe Morgan as creative and funny and a good artist. But what no one around her had yet identified, and what wouldn't be formally diagnosed until after the attack, was that she was experiencing early onset childhood schizophrenia. Her father had gone through something similar in his own adolescence, although he hadn't been diagnosed until later. The warning signs in Morgan had gone unrecognized by everyone around her. Her school, her family, and the people who saw her every day just didn't recognize what kind of things Morgan was dealing with. Morgan was, by the time of the sleepover, deep inside a fixation that had been building for months, and that fixation had intensified considerably after she became close with Anissa. Anissa Weier lived in the same apartment complex as Morgan. They rode the bus together, and they shared an intense interest in a specific corner of internet horror fiction, which we'll get into in just a minute, but it was central to everything in this story. By her own admission, Payton didn't much like Anissa, but Morgan loved having her around, and Payton loved Morgan, so she stayed in the orbit of the 2 of them. And that brings us back to what is unique about 3-person friendships. It's something that there's actually been research done on how those dynamics work. They're called triadic friendships, which is a group of 3, and that they tend to be inherently less stable than pair friendships, because any 2 people who bond more closely than with the 3rd person will automatically leave out that 3rd person. And usually this plays out as ordinary social friction with hurt feelings, which is the kind of things that kids navigate all the time. But here, and in multiple other true crime cases, it plays out as something far more sinister. This specific triadic relationship between Payton, Anissa, and Morgan really becomes tragic, in part because of what was going on in Morgan's own mind, and in part because Anissa had come to believe the same things Morgan believed. But before we get into exactly what happened between the three girls in the woods that day, we need to bring in the Slenderman character, because the story makes no sense without him. Slenderman is a fictional character who was created in June of 2009 by a man named Eric Knudsen. He was posting on a forum called Something Awful. The forum was running a contest where users were asked to create fake paranormal photographs. Knudsen submitted 2 black and white images of children with a tall, thin, featureless figure edited into the background, and he added text written to look like recovered documents, like eyewitness accounts, and the figure was called the Slenderman. The images spread immediately, and I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've probably seen photographs, not real photographs, but edited photographs with this creepy Slenderman in the background, and there is just something where you just can't take your eyes off of it. This kind of horror fiction that circulates online is called creepypasta, from copy-paste stories designed to be reproduced and spread. Slenderman became the most well-known creepypasta character, and part of what made him effective was the deliberate design. He has no face, which is very unsettling in a way that's hard to fully articulate, but is genuinely rooted in how our brains process human faces. He's described as specifically targeting children, lurking near woods, stalking people who became aware of him, and some versions of the lore describe proxies, or people in Slenderman's service. And the fiction was built to feel like documentation, including fake photographs, fake police reports, fake testimonials. The shared theme here is that the people who were writing in this world were treating it as if it were all real. For most people, this was clearly a creative exercise. It's an internet urban legend and a scary story just in a new format. But for Morgan Geyser, the line between fiction and reality had already stopped working in the way that it does for most people. And she actually believed that Slenderman was real. So what was actually happening with Morgan and inside her? We don't find that out until after the girls are arrested the day of the stabbing. And it was through the legal process that people really began to question what exactly led these girls into the woods with a knife, intending on stabbing their friend. Morgan Geyser was diagnosed several months after her arrest with early onset childhood schizophrenia, which is one of the rarest forms of a very severe illness. Normally, it doesn't appear until adulthood. The attorney who represented her later told reporters that from the very first time he met with her, something was obviously wrong. She would look around the room at things that weren't there. She had apparently been experiencing hallucinations and delusions for some time, and none of it had been caught by anyone around her.
Part of me still sees Morgan as the kid that she was when I first started representing her.
What does this mean in the context of Slenderman? Well, it's important to understand that Morgan didn't simply enjoy these stories the way you or I might enjoy a horror movie, understanding that it's fiction. She believed she didn't just have like wishful thinking that he was real, but she had a fixed delusion in the clinical sense, meaning that it was her illness and not something that she could just reason herself out of. Once she believed Slenderman was real, the logic of all the lore followed naturally. He would harm her family if she didn't prove her loyalty, and she needed to become a proxy for Slenderman.
I didn't want to do this. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. Anisha told me we had to.
Why?
Because she said that he'd kill our families.
Anissa, for her part, had a different psychological profile. A forensic psychologist who evaluated her testified that she had experienced a shared delusion. Sometimes that's called folie à deux, where a person comes to believe something false because someone close to them believes it with great intensity and conviction. Anissa, according to evidence presented at trial, had been uncertain about the plan at various points, but she had ultimately come to accept Morgan's belief in Slenderman's reality, and she wanted to prove herself to him and prove his existence to skeptics. I'm guessing there was a little bit there too of Anissa wanting to prove her friendship with Morgan. And so if your friend is telling you that something is 100% real and they believe it and they truly, truly believe it, you start to feel, and especially as a 12-year-old girl, you would start to feel like you're going against your friend and that you're risking your friendship if you start pointing out that, hey, no, Slenderman probably not real. So I'm guessing there's a bit of that component going on as well.
We think we see him sometimes.
Okay.
Like when we were walking up to where we were going, I saw him out of the corner of my eye on this side.
Okay.
And then Morgan said she heard a twig crack when no one was moving.
Morgan and Anissa were not just two kids who got swept up in a scary story. One of them was severely mentally ill and operating inside a delusional framework that had been developing for years, and the other was drawn into that framework through closeness and trust and through a specific psychological process that forensic specialists have a name for it. So it is a known condition, the shared delusion. The planning for the attack had apparently started in late December of 2013 or January of 2014, about 5 months before the sleepover. There had been at least 2 earlier opportunities that the girls considered but then pulled back from. They eventually settled on the birthday celebration as the moment that they would prove their loyalty to Slenderman. So what happens in the park? The 3 girls walked from Morgan's home to David's Park, which is a wooded area in Waukesha, which isn't super remote, but it's just a nice park with woods. According to court testimony, Morgan and Anissa proposed a game of hide and seek, and they got Payton to lie down on the ground and cover herself with leaves and sticks as part of the game. And then Morgan stabbed her. And she stabbed her 19 times in the arms, in the legs, and in her torso. 2 of the wounds struck major organs. One went through her diaphragm and into her liver and her stomach, and another came close enough to a major artery near her heart that the surgeon who operated on her later said if it had gone the width of a human hair further, she would not have survived.
The knife came directly down at this point where this large branch was coming off of this major artery and cut through the tissue overlying it so that the vessels were totally exposed by this injury.
The knife cut through the tissue, but not the artery itself.
Exactly. The knife stopped at the wall of the artery.
And had it not?
Had it not, she would have had a major heart attack from the amount of bleeding and probably died within a minute or 2.
Morgan and Anissa told her that they were going to go get help, and then they left, which you can just imagine. Actually, I can't imagine what poor Payton was feeling, knowing that she had been stabbed by her friends and then having them say they're going to go get help. And she had to be thinking, she had to be really scared that they were not going to go get help. And not only that, but maybe they would actually come back and kill her. Morgan and Anissa walked through the woods towards Interstate 94, heading north because that was the direction of the Nicolet National Forest where they believed Slenderman's mansion was. Payton, stabbed 19 times, pulled herself out of the woods, and she made it to the road where, thankfully, a passing cyclist found her and called for help. She was taken immediately to the hospital and underwent 6 hours of surgery, and thankfully, she survived.
Do you feel like you're a survivor?
Yeah, I shouldn't be alive. I really shouldn't after what happened.
It didn't take police long to find Morgan and Anissa about 5 hours after the attack, roughly 5 miles away on the side of the freeway. Before searching Morgan, the officer asked if she had anything sharp on her, and she said she had a knife in her bag. Both girls were taken into custody and charged the following day, kicking off what would be a long, still continuing to this day, legal process. The question became, how do you prosecute 2 12-year-olds for attempted murder? Under Wisconsin law, serious juvenile cases can be transferred to adult court, and the judge, in this case, made that call. Both girls were ultimately tried as adults. Both entered guilty pleas and were found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, which is a verdict that might sound contradictory, but it does have a very specific legal meaning. It acknowledges that the act occurred alongside a determination that mental illness precluded full legal responsibility. In Wisconsin, that outcome leads to psychiatric commitment rather than incarceration. Anissa received a commitment of up to 25 years.
Swire continues to believe that Slenderman is real. She also stated that as recently as July 2017, she believed that an evil spirit was pushing down on her bed after the spirit had been let out of a homemade Ouija board. She has continued to be easily influenced by peers. She has been convinced by another inmate who was a devil worshiper that her co-actor, meaning Miss Geyser, is possessed. What's best for the community may not be what's best for Anissa Weier. As much as we can sit back and say, I will never do that again, and I think it's sincere, I'm not criticizing her for saying it, we don't know.
And Morgan received a commitment of up to 40 years.
To let Ella and her family know I'm sorry. I never meant this to happen. I hope that she's doing well.
Reflecting the severity of her diagnosis and her role in what happened. Morgan's early treatment was reportedly inconsistent and not particularly adequate. Psychiatrists who later evaluated her said that this likely worsened her psychosis in the moment. It wasn't until November of 2015, about a year and a half after the attack, that she began a consistent regimen of antipsychotic medications. After that, according to her legal team and clinicians treating her, she became able to engage meaningfully in treatment for the first time and began to show what appeared to be genuine remorse.
It was so interesting to see Morgan at her sentencing and how different she appeared than she had when she was first interrogated after the stabbing incident. She was more emotional, remorseful. Now, could that have been manipulation? Absolutely. But I took it to be real, sincere emotion for what she had done.
Anissa was granted conditional release in 2021 at age 19 and was allowed to live with her father. Her internet use is restricted and monitored, and she is required to remain on psychiatric medication. Then, before we move on to more recent developments with Morgan, I want to spend a little bit of time on Payton, because often in this story, although she is the person at the center of the case, she also tends to be the one to get the least amount of attention. She was stabbed 19 times by two people she considered to be her friends. She crawled out of the woods alone at age 12. She had emergency surgery for 6 hours and then spent years dealing with the aftermath of that, and I'm assuming is still dealing with it today. The difficulty of trusting people, the hypervigilance that comes after such an act of violence, the small rituals that made her feel safer at night. In a 2019 ABC News interview, Payton mentioned sleeping with a pair of broken scissors nearby, just in case, because it made her feel less afraid. Payton also said something in that interview which is really special. She said that without everything that happened to her, she wouldn't know who she is, and that the doctors who saved her life inspired her to pursue medicine. And now that's not just a tidy redemption arc, and I don't think she was really pretending that it was one, but it's more an indication that she found a way to point her life in a direction that makes sense to her, which, given what she survived, seems like about as much as anyone could ask for. So where do things stand now with Morgan? Morgan Geyser spent nearly 7 years at the Winnebago Mental Health Institute in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. In January of 2025, after 4 separate petitions for conditional release and significant opposition from the state's Department of Health Services, a judge finally approved her release. 3 forensic psychologists testified that she had made genuine clinical progress. Those opposed to Morgan's release had some very specific concerns. Prosecutors raised issues about a book she had been reading and about contact she had been having with a man who collected materials associated with violent crimes. Her legal team disputed the framing of these concerns, and psychologists maintained their clinical assessment that she was okay to be released, and the judge sided with the experts. Finding a placement for Morgan wasn't straightforward. At least one group home in Sun Prairie declined, citing concerns about the publicity that would follow, but a placement was eventually arranged in Madison, Wisconsin.
If you look at the maturity that she exhibits at 18, 19, 20, her understanding of mental health, her cooperativeness with treatment, her insight into her conditions, her ability to be her own advocate with the treatment providers, I mean, it's a 10 out of 10.
The Waukesha County prosecutors and the Department of Health Services raised serious concerns Geyser was not ready to be released, despite unanimous support from doctors monitoring her.
She had been there approximately 2 months when, on the night of November 22, 2025, she cut off her GPS monitoring bracelet and just left. The Department of Corrections received a tamper alert that evening, and the group home was contacted around midnight and confirmed that she was gone. An apprehension request was issued. The Madison Police Department, however, inexplicably didn't receive notification until nearly 12 hours later on Sunday morning, which later prompted a legislative inquiry that resulted in one corrections employee being fired and 2 others suspended. So that's not great on the communication side. It's also not great for Morgan. I mean, what are you doing? By Sunday evening, Morgan had been located at a truck stop in Illinois, about 170 miles away from Madison. She was with a 43-year-old man she had met at a church in Wisconsin a couple of months earlier. When the police approached her, she initially gave a false name and then told officers she didn't want to say who she was because she'd done something bad.
I did something really wrong.
And that they could just Google her. She later told investigators that she had fled because she was afraid of being separated from her friend.
Give me your name and date of birth. You're not wanted for murder, right?
Right.
Okay, then there shouldn't be any problem.
The plan. Did you have a plan? Did she have a plan?
We didn't have a real plan. Just get as far away as we could. Just vanish.
Whose visits to the group home had been restricted. She signed an extradition waiver and was returned to Wisconsin within a few days. In late December 2025, a judge revoked her conditional release. She was returned to a psychiatric facility, and as of early 2026, she is being held at a hospital in Waukesha, Wisconsin, with the state filing a petition to revoke her release entirely. Her supervision order on paper runs through 2058. Payton's family issued a statement during the escape saying that Payton was safe and that they were in close contact with law enforcement. They also expressed frustration, however, that they hadn't been notified more promptly when Morgan went missing, which is a pretty reasonable thing to be frustrated about. So where does that leave us? Payton is, by all indications, living her life, which is the most straightforward good thing about any of this. She survived something that should have killed her, and she got through years of recovery, and she has now moved forward in a direction that she decided on. Anissa has been in the community since 2021, living under the conditions of her release without incident as far as public records show. Morgan is back in a psychiatric facility, and the question of when or whether she'll be released again is unresolved. I can't imagine that's going to come easy. The clinical picture, based on the testimony of people who treated her, is of someone who made real progress and then made a very bad decision. Whether those two things can coexist in a way that eventually leads to a sustainable life outside of an institution, I genuinely just don't know, and I don't think anyone really does right now. But the thing I keep coming back to is all the different failure points that led to that morning in the park. Morgan's illness wasn't identified, and the people around her didn't have the tools to even begin to recognize what was happening to her. A creative fiction community built something that works beautifully as horror for people interacting with it who are in good mental health, but catastrophically sometimes for at least one person who wasn't. And then there's the friendship dynamic that put Payton on the outside of something that she couldn't ever quite figure out, but that ended up putting her in the wrong place at the wrong time. Really a satisfying explanation, but I'm not sure there's supposed to be one. Sometimes things just don't resolve themselves in a clean way, and this is one of those stories, and it's a continuing story, at least for Morgan. So that's the story of the Slenderman stabbing. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, stay careful, and maybe rethink your 3 friendship group. Bye, guys.